Welcome to today's Explainer. Have you ever wondered if the origins of one of the world's biggest religions were just completely misunderstood? Well, today we're putting on our historical investigator hats to unpack a genuinely fascinating debate. We're drawing directly from Chapter 6 of our source text regarding the famous Dead Sea Scrolls and looking at a historical controversy that fundamentally questions the true beginnings of early Christianity. So let's just dive right into this absolutely explosive question that literally rocked the theological world. When scholars first started translating the Dead Sea Scrolls, they noticed some pretty striking parallels between the early Christian movement and the Essenes, which was the strict monastic-style Jewish sect that actually wrote these texts. This led some folks to boldly ask, was the early Christian message actually unique, or was it just an imitation of an isolated desert cult? To get to the bottom of this, our source gives us a really clear roadmap. We'll be looking at 5 key areas: the controversy, the righteous teacher versus Christ, counsels and wealth, the sacred meal, and finally, secrecy versus universality. Section 1, the controversy. Let's look at the claims that started this whole debate. The source highlights that some pretty renowned scholars, specifically Ernest Renan and later on André Dupont-Sommer, made some massive claims. Dupont-Sommer basically argued that early Christianity was, well, a carbon copy of this older desert group. He suggested that Jesus was simply repeating a role that had already been played by a leader at Qumran. He was effectively reducing the entire Christian narrative to a mere continuation of Essene practices. It was a completely scandalous theory at the time. Now, what's so fascinating is that these ancient, fragmented texts are the literal foundation for Dupont-Sommer's controversial thesis. He looked at these faded letters and, honestly, extrapolated a massive historical shift. But, as our source points out, when you take a much closer, rigorous look at these exact same artifacts, you start to see some major flaws in this whole copycat theory. Moving on to Section 2, the righteous teacher versus Christ. Right off the bat, the author argues there is a stark contrast between the leaders of both groups. Over at Qumran, the community was led by a figure known as the teacher of righteousness. But, and this is absolutely crucial, the source insists this teacher was definitively a mortal man. No claims of being the ultimate Messiah, nobody prayed to him, and he certainly didn't give his name to the sect. But then you look at Christ. His followers viewed him from the very beginning as divine, the living head of the church, and they literally took his name. They became known as Christians. Now, Dupont-Sommer leaned heavily on documents like the Habakkuk Commentary, which is this ancient prophetic interpretation text. He claimed this specific document proved the Qumran teacher was a resurrected figure, kind of prefiguring Jesus. But other specialists, they strongly push back. They argue that a careful reading absolutely does not support the idea of a divine, resurrected teacher. The evidence just doesn't stretch that far, folks. Okay, Section 3, Councils and Communal Ownership. Did early Christians just steal Qumran's administrative playbook? Well, regarding the famous 12-member council, the author clarifies a really huge functional difference. Yes, both groups liked the number 12, obviously tracing back to the tribes of Israel, but Qumran's council was this permanent bureaucratic board of directors that strictly mandated the inclusion of 3 priests. Early Christians, on the other hand, had the 12 apostles. This was a unique, foundational group, no priest required, and when the apostles passed away, that specific 12-seat council wasn't just perpetually refilled like a corporate board. And if you want to see just how bureaucratic Qumran really was, just look at their rules for communal property. You couldn't just walk up, hand over your money, and join. Oh no, it was a super rigid process. First, initial admission, then a mandatory 2-year probation period. Imagine undergoing a 2-year background check just to give away your life savings. And only after passing all of that were you subjected to a compulsory surrender of all your personal wealth. Contrast that highly rigid process with early Christian accounts. For early Christians, surrendering wealth was an immediate, completely voluntary act of charity to help the needy, just as we see in the biblical accounts. There was no 2-year probation, no compulsory institutional seizure of your assets. The Christian approach was built on immediate, voluntary care for the community, not some strict legalistic timeline. Section 4 brings us to one of the most debated rituals, the truth of the sacred meal. So it turns out that while both groups used bread and wine, the meaning behind them was just worlds apart. The author highlights that Qumran's meals were strict, daily routines blessed by a priest, and they symbolized their hope for a future messianic kingdom. The Christian Eucharist, though, that carried a deeply transformational theology.
It wasn't just a blessed meal. It was viewed as literally uniting the believer with the divine through the body and blood of Christ. And you know what? The Qumran texts contain absolutely nothing resembling that kind of theology.
And finally, Section 5, the core difference, secrecy versus universality. This is where the insights from scholars like Al-Akkad really bring everything into sharp focus. According to his analysis in our source text, the Qumran sect was characterized by this extreme, almost paranoid isolation. They were highly exclusive, they bound their members with severe oaths to keep their doctrines totally secret. They were consumed by rigid literalism, and they essentially fled into the desert because they viewed the material world as entirely corrupt. They were just waiting in those caves for an apocalyptic war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness.
Now think about how fundamentally opposite the early Christian impulse was. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Instead of fleeing to a desert cave to hide a secret doctrine, their foundational mandate was explicitly outward-facing. They were commanded to cross borders, go global, and engage directly with the very society that the Essenes had completely run away from.
So the author concludes that this massive shift from a localized, secretive, literalist group to a universal, global faith, it just completely dismantles the whole idea that one was merely a copy of the other. The Qumran community represents a fascinating, albeit rigid, historical dead end. Christianity, conversely, broke free from that literalism to offer a message meant for all humanity. Sure, there are superficial similarities, but the core missions, completely and fundamentally opposed. As we wrap up today's explainer, I think it really shows how absolutely vital it is to look past our initial assumptions and actually dig into the evidence. The Dead Sea Scrolls are a magnificent archaeological treasure, for sure. They give us an incredible window into an ancient, strict desert sect, but they are not the secret blueprint for Christianity. And it leaves us with a thrilling question. If we could get this so wrong at first glance, what other secrets are buried in the desert, just waiting to challenge and completely rewrite our view of history? Thanks so much for exploring this with me today.